We want to talk to Marcelyn a little bit about the project and what it is and what it means and maybe what it should have been, what it is and what it should have been. Just out of idle curiosity, did any of you read the text that Marcelyn wrote for the project? Anybody? Too long? Nobody read it. Not even Craig? No? Huh. It's interesting. I mean, because I wanted to say something about it's extremely beautiful, actually. And sitting at SCI-Arc for a long time, as many of you have, and listening to people either read or make speeches or pontificate in juries, it's hard to write, it's hard to speak, and many times, as you know, there are people who are extremely capable and talented in making things who are not simultaneously particularly effective at writing poetry. I mean, it happens. So the two aren't necessarily corollary. Once in a while they are. But the text, you need to read the text because it's very beautiful and very poetic and very compelling, I have to say. And it asks a lot of architecture. Maybe do I dare read something? Wait a minute. Why don't you read it? Don't make me read it. Can you read the first paragraph or read until you get tired? Just so you know what I'm talking. Can you read it?
You want me to read the quote?
The opening.
Or
the opening.
Okay, the opening is actually a quote by Aris Fioretos, who's a writer.
I thought you wrote that.
I wrote everything else, but this sentence, and there's one down here.
It doesn't say who said it.
Yes.
Where does it say that?
Right there.
Ah, son of a bitch.
In any case.
I ruined the whole thing. Okay, but why don't, okay, nevertheless, so I screwed that up. But the question is, if listen to this anyway, what the hell, we'll raise the question, and see, you tell me if architecture can do this. In other words, what she's saying, whoever said it, can architecture live up to, can architecture deliver something like that? Or is this the province of music or poetry? So can you read it?
Okay. Aris Fioretos, from the Gray Book.
Jesus Christ.
Graying would be what makes time readable. Shaky circles penciled on sheets of air or scratched on the flat surface of the sea, expanding wrinkily, only to merge with the oblivion on which they were once written, merely marking the monument of a momentary ripple.
Could I say that again? Did you hear what this? So this was marking the monument of a momentary ripple. Marking the monument of a momentary ripple. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what that is, but you don't do it every day.
A transient trans.
I don't think.
A crease first unfolding, then ceasing to be. Although such graying may provide form for the formless, it seems itself thus to appear only by being attached to something else. Like an escaping trail of effervescent dizziness, the elastic, colorless gauze swaddled around an invisible body of air, a vanishing turning point. And the rest is mine. That's ours.
Okay. So, my question, since this is roughly speaking a student constituency, is whether that kind of descriptive text can be transmutated as architecture. In other words, is this that, or do the words have to be as complicated as the spatial experience or idea. In other words, what's the relationship between a quote like that and the work we're looking at? Maybe that's a better way to put it. Does it help us? Does it hurt us? Is it irrelevant? And again, I say it because we spend a lot of time sitting in a lot of discussions and a lot of juries and a lot of lectures and a lot of exhibit evaluations, listening to various kinds of speeches and looking at things on the wall. And one of the fascinating questions is it what I say it is because I say that's what it is? You understand? Or is it something else? And I'm not saying what it really is, which could be the case from time to time. Anyway, maybe you can take a crack at that. In other words, to what extent is this that, or to what extent do the words, however beautiful, do they matter?
Yeah, the words matter. Actually, the choice of that particular text to talk about this show was because that writer, a guy named Aris Fioretos, who happens to be Greek, but his language growing up was Swedish, and he wrote the text in English. The text is his first shift from literary criticism to fiction and narrative. So the text occupies this gray zone between those two genres. And we were thinking about the gray zone produced by how geometry, contemporary projects that deal with the instantiation of geometry possibly can exist or address this gray zone between the digital and the analog, looking at a kind of maybe an exhaustion of digital indexicality, I would say. So trying to find this mediating zone where the sort of ideality of the geometry, which you see in the drawing back there, gets manifested. There's one geometric primitive that drives the whole, everything in the show is the same geometric primitive combined by a variety of Boolean unions, Boolean intersections. All the lamps are identical, in fact. So it's looking at how one can push lines through material and yield a set of different objects, different manifestations of that form that begin to then work together in another constellation.
I'm not sure if that's the answer to the question I was asking, but you're saying all of this coheres around a very particular drawing.
Yeah.
So I guess the first question is, what's the exhibit? Is the exhibit the pieces on the floor, the lamps, the wires, the piece of lamps, the wires in the space? What's the exhibit?
Well, the exhibit...
The drawing on the wall?
Yes. Yeah, the exhibit,
the people sitting around? What is it?
It's called Aqueotrope. Again, a play on words. I love words. So trope as in figure of speech, trope as in the use of a metaphor, trope as in tropism, which means to turn, as in heliotropism. So the idea of the aqueotrope was that the tiles on a kind of very basic level are meant to be roof tiles. The tiles are the gray...
This is a tile.
Concrete pieces, yes.
It's a tile because you say it's a tile.
Yes. It's a prototype of a tile for a hydrodynamic green roof.
So, but in the vernacular, I mean, is there anything in the show that would associate the pieces with a roof or with the covering of a roof? I mean, in the lexicon of building, conventional lexicon of building, tile has a certain meaning and a number of uses, not all of which are external to a building, and may have something to do with maintenance and water and so on, but there are a number of associations. Some are operational or technical, and some are visual in a very conventional way. So when somebody looks at, I mean, I can think of a number of associations, and so can everybody else in the room, and the first one I thought of wasn't, is it a tile? Anybody look at this and understand this as a tile or as a roof tile? So what have we gained by assigning it the level of tile absent a way to associate this with an idea of tile or roof or operationally in a tradition, even if it doesn't look like it belongs. You say, how do I know it's a tile? You told me it's a tile. I thought it was something totally different.
Well, the decision, originally, this came from an earlier project called the Hydrophile, which had these kind of protuberant forms on the roof, and we thought about making those tiles and mocking up a piece of that roof in this gallery. We later decided, for a variety of reasons, to flip that and say, rather than building an armature and putting these tiles on this armature, let's simulate a roofscape on the ground, and then let's invert the relationship. So the green roof, obviously, inside the gallery isn't going to thrive. We're not going to have water in here. So let's address the kind of, in a sense, the artifice of the gallery environment, or the mediated environment we're in, and say, okay, the tiles get placed on the floor, you meander through them, and the lamps become these kind of illuminating devices. I mean, the lighting is higher than it normally is in this show, but the idea is that the positioning of the lamps vis-a-vis the tiles is meant to reveal or to make inscrutable certain aspects of that geometric form that's being used. And so the idea is kind of suggesting that the whole space is a kind of inverted roofscape. So then you get what we call the cable sargassum, which was also developed by the group of SCI-Arc students who participated in the workshop, that we'd like to also extend a great thanks to. That was a kind of collective improvisation in terms of having 9 pick points where the lighting fixtures are coming down.
Well, wait a minute, are we getting...
working through that.
We're getting, so if this is the floor, if this is the roof, is this the floor? Is this right side up or upside down?
This is kind of at the bottom of the sea. That's the sargassum floating above.
This is the bottom of the sea. So this is the...
You're in water right now.
But at the bottom of the sea, are these continuous or the discontinuous? In other words, is hypothetically, if you were to make this a roof, so I have a roof, I want you to build my roof. Are these in other words, is the concrete part of the roof?
Well, there would be more of them, and they would be spaced quite closely.
But should anybody, in other words, am I asking the wrong question, is the question? Because I'm trying to associate what you're claiming it is with what I see. And when I see it, you could make an argument, this is one of the most beautiful collections of pieces I think we've seen in an exhibit at SCI-Arc, for reasons that have, and we can talk about that have absolutely nothing to do with what your argument is with a transformation of forms or hydrology or green policy or what's a roof or what's a floor, or does it make any difference? If you had to talk about these objects in a purely poetic way, which is why I thought the poetry at the beginning was useful, or in an aesthetic way, that's very different than talking about it in an operational way.
Yeah.
So I think one of the problems with the exhibit, at least the problem with the exhibit, if you have the exhibit and we just walk around, take a look, enjoy it in the way that we do, and go and watch the Laker game or something. In other words, but if we're insisting on a discourse or a discussion, and the discussion is accompanied with some conception of meaning or content, and that requires, back to the word discussion with the author that I got wrong, that the explanation has something to do with the content. Okay? So if the explanation has something to do with the content, then you owe us, or you're obligated to give us a rationale for saying this is a roof, or what's a roof, or this is a tile, how is it a tile? How does that allow us to understand the meaning of the exhibition? Or should we just talk about what we see and forget about transformation of form, molds, hydrology, green policy, and talk about wires and translucent, transparent, solid, and things like that?
Well,
it's like a dreamscape, really.
It's kind of operating on 2 levels, because I think for us, a big interest was saying that, okay, this could be a prototype of you know, a one-to-one scale tile that you could have on a roof, on a building, in an exterior environment. But more importantly, in the context of the SCI-Arc gallery, we wanted to deal with some issues that I think a lot of us are grappling with currently, especially here at the school, in terms of how we see, you know, some people have talked about the post-digital paradigm, the kind of
Who talked
shift.
about that?
Well, some of the faculty here.
Wiscombe.
Wiscombe.
The post-digital paradigm.
You know, and really thinking about to what extent analog processes and the digital processes begin to come together, to what extent you allow for some kind of deviation or discrepancy to occur. You know, if 10 years ago the interest really was in saying, okay, everything is like CNC fabricated and we get a perfect result and it's all about that tight fit, we're looking at the loose fit. Like, why would you want to blow glass, which can be a very sort of, I think, a loose fit process, into a very precisely formed plaster mold? So the mold, again, you know, the interest was in seeing the geometry get, in a sense, corrupted by some of the
Remember, we had,
processes.
I think a year or so ago, we had a discussion in the robots in the robot house, conceptually about the traditional definition operationally of a robot, meaning, okay, you put the wheels on, you put the crankshaft in, you close the door, clunk, 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 step by step by step, where robots are programmed to repeat as a kind of redundancy. And what we were trying to do is to get the robot to make a transition in process, to sketch or to move in a certain way, and at a certain point to change her mind. In other words, not set up in the predictable redundancy of robotics, but to have the robot malleable enough programmatically so that the program could evolve. Okay, so we had that discussion, and the question is, what was the value of that discussion? But the value of that discussion could be understood in two ways. One having to do with robotics in a narrow sense, meaning the intricacy of programming robots to do various tasks and to change in mid-course. So this is interesting in a technical way. It doesn't tell you what the robot is making. In other words, if it started to make the car and then it turned into a plane, which turned into a boat, which sailed away, okay? So that it was able to transform its goals and reutilize itself in order to modify the objective. So the point is, if this is a technical argument about CNCing in a conventional way or CNCing in a variable way, the question that remains is, why are we having that discussion? In other words, what does it allow us to do? What does it allow us to make in a human sense? What problem are we solving, not in terms of a piece of technical apparatus or the virtuosity or the dexterity of the operator in doing various things? You know, I can walk on my feet and I can stand on my hands and I can walk on my elbows, and who gives a shit? So what? So what does that allow me to do or to understand or to go or something? So it seems to me when we get into these debates about the very introverted debates, because they have to do with an exchange among people who are technical specialists. So if you made something, I mean, some of these are one piece. Some of these are multiple pieces and fit together. In other words, what are we saying your new understanding has allowed us to make in not only in a technical way, in an aesthetic way? What does it mean? We're interested in what it means in a broader human sense. If you bring your mom in here, and you roll out that CNC stuff, her eyes are going to glaze over. But I guarantee you, if she looks at this, she will find very particular meanings in the exhibition. So the question is, isn't it better if the technical discovery is your secret and you don't tell anybody? But what it allows you to do is to make something which gives you a different perspective and understanding, because it allows you to deliver different content. And what we're interested in is content. Right?
Well,
maybe not.
I don't know how to answer that one.
You can say no.
We're interested in content. I mean, the meaning question is, I think it's a tricky one in terms of how, how does form convey meaning? I mean, associations will be attached to these artifacts in the space, regardless of what I might say about them. The context of them vis-a-vis one another already produces a certain suggestion of, affiliations. But I think I think it's difficult to kind of assign a particular meaning. The suggestion, the act of naming the exhibition Aqueotrope, what we refer to as the cable sargassum, the way the things are staged in the space, I think all contributes to the suggestion of a kind of aqueous environment. But I would never say that that's a meaning.
But let me put it another way. Maybe I'm not explaining, or maybe it's not the kind of question you want to answer. If you took Lebbeus Wood's drawings without singling out a particular drawing, you say, look, this guy can draw. There's no question about that. He can draw. So as a draftsman or as an artist, he can draw uniquely, no question about that. But if that's all he could do, that would give his work. By the way, I have to say, we're making an exhibit of Leb, a SCI-Arc exhibit in October. We're going to build an installation and put up some stuff. So we're working on that a little bit to acknowledge his work going forward, not in memoriam. But anyway, if you look at what oh, I thought you had a question. If you look at what he draws, so he draws Sarajevo in the midst of a war. He draws the Malecón in Havana and makes a proposition to reconstitute that huge waterfront in Havana. So there are operational purposes, there are human purposes, there are technical solutions, and there's a kind of artistry that pulls the thing together. So you wouldn't be able to explain his work by simply saying he had a certain operational or technical skill set. So I'm looking for an associative meaning that would take us outside this room and take us outside a kind of narrow architect's discussion about means and try to explain what it is we're looking at. I mean, so my guess is if we went around the room and we took these 6 guys here and we asked them what they were looking at, you want to do that? Why don't we do that, just for fun? What do you see? I mean, 10 words or less. Bling, 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 bling. Go ahead. Yeah, come on. It's SCI-Arc. Don't be embarrassed. Huh? Growing, living. Anybody else? Nobody. Yeah.
Somewhere between a volcano and breasts.
Now a volcano. What was the other option?
I knew someone would go there.
No, a volcano and what?
He said a volcano and women's breasts.
It's okay. I mean, it's okay. I mean, anatomically, I didn't know you were so shy, but I mean, I guess everybody has their areas of vulnerability. but I mean, it seems kind of obvious. Isn't that what it says? I mean, it's a piece of human physiology. Doesn't it suggest that? I mean, that might be one of the things it suggests. But if you say it suggests it's about a milling process, or if you say it's an advance on a CNCing process, but that's not what the exhibit tells you. I mean, various people for various reasons might be interested in engineering and fabrication, and all of that is part of the discussion. But the sort of physiological, so that's not so.
I see more the excrescent side.
The shy guy over is that
the dark volcanic. I mean, do you know Joseph Beuys's piece Primordial Animals? Do you know these sculptures that Beuys did in the '82? I think it was.
No.
It's called Primordial Animals.
No.
They're cast iron. They look like excrescents. They're these odd, but he names them the primordial animals. So they're kind of suddenly endowed with this kind of a life, as it were.
Yeah.
The disturbing concatenation of those two readings is somewhat what we were looking at in terms of the production of these pieces, the choice of material, the coloration, lack thereof, the graying aspect. That's all, very.
But because if you read it that way as a piece of physiology, then it gets to be something which is traditional. It's like a piece of Cubist sculpture, in a way, because there are parts you recognize in a literal sense, but they're bent or distorted or multiplied. What was that movie you told me, that Bond movie with a guy with 3 breasts or something you sent me to? Yeah, okay. So...
There's Hans Bellmer, too.
Huh?
Hans Bellmer, you know his work, Surrealist? Okay, that's definitely a reference.
But I mean, but then it puts it in a very traditional I mean, we didn't get to the roof and the wires, but just in terms of what's on the floor, that you could praise it for its texture, for its whatever it is, multiplicity, for its associations, for its erotic qualities. I mean, it may have all of those things. And you could, I mean, maybe this is the time to call a psychiatrist into the room. I mean, they could be understood as a series of dismembered bodies, actually, that only preserved one piece. Guess which piece? But I mean, not to be deviant about it, and maybe that's just my problem, but it seems like there are associations like that are available, and that the way that it was done, the colors, the absorptive capacity, and the sort of the regularity. It's like a collection, like I collect stamps from Bolivia, and it's different. They're all from Bolivia. So I collect a certain part of human physiology. It all comes out in a slightly different form, and here's my collection, And it seems like that however beautifully they're made, but the other one was, I don't know, it's the mountains or the Himalayas. There are other kinds of abstractions that you could associate with it. But you have to be a sophisticate to associate a technical process with it, I think.
And you think that's a positive aspect or a negative aspect?
I think what you made is one thing, and the way you explained it is something different. And it seems to me the explanation is likely to take you away from what is the immediate reaction or the immediate meaning of it, So I'm not sure that everyone is so intrinsically fascinated by how you did it as opposed to what you did. And then there comes the question of, okay, what you did and why you did it. But the why comes out. If somebody asks you why did you do this, Marcelyn? And the answer is a whole series of technical explanations or green explanations. But I don't think anybody really associates, if this is a roof, is the roof sloping? Is it flat? What's the shape of the roof?
Well, in this case, it would be flat.
So how would you see it?
You'd walk on it.
On the roof?
I mean, the design of the building for which these are intended is absent. That's intentional. I mean, again, the whole idea of...
But then you'd never see it, maybe.
The idea of having a show in a space like this, which is a gallery, we're indoors, there's certain kind of artifice, I thought, to attempting to construct a green roof inside of a gallery seemed odd to me. So the thought was, let's take an aspect of that, let's take the prototype of the tile, and let's push that to some other places to create a particular construct inside of this gallery, which is something other than roof. And so I think that
are they solid or are they hollow inside? They're solid.
Those are hollow.
They're all hollow.
Yeah.
Would it have been helpful to turn any of them upside down, or to see to understand, or to show the mold, or to understand that if the mold and the process of forming these things was important to understand, particularly?
Not to understand. I mean, I think that's where maybe we differ, because what I find actually really amusing about the reaction is that I would never have assumed, like several years ago, everybody was using foam in order to simulate, you know, the kind of smoothness of an auto body finish. There was a lot of foam and Bondo and auto body paint to achieve the smoothest possible finish. The odd thing here is that a lot of people think these are foam and they're actually cement. So it's like a weird, our relationship to materials has become so mediated by our expectations of how things are fabricated that I found that really odd.
But that's what was coming back to you. But
they're not foam.
When you say everybody is doing Bondo and repairing their Mercedes or auto body work or something like that, but this isn't really about everybody. It's just about you. Because it's not so much what, I don't know, I would never make a statement what everybody is doing. This is hard to, but even if everybody's doing that, okay.
Everyone's not doing that now. I'm saying there was
I don't know if everybody was doing that ever. Well, but maybe if they were auto mechanics or something. But even if they were, therefore everybody is doing it and you're also doing it? Or you're doing it but you have a different cast and therefore you're giving it a different meaning? In other words, what's the meaning of what you're doing relative to what everybody's doing?
Well,
I mean, are you altering the meaning? Are you confirming what they're doing? What's the meaning of the point?
I guess the meaning is the inscrutability of not fixing the object as something where it's processes of fabrication, it's formal logic, that all that is kind of understood immediately, right, but that it has a variety of associations that one can attach to it.
Some of which we talked about.
Yeah, and that's actually desirable, I think.
Right, but then inscrutability, I mean, it seems to me, it's not only the drawing, but if you read the text, which not one person in the room read the text, as far as I know, or wouldn't own up to it. If it's about inscrutability, then isn't the idea, here it is, sucker, go figure it out. But you're not making it inscrutable, you're making it scrutable, because you're giving a whole series of points about entropy and the transformation of, it's like ice to water to steam, you know, those kinds of things where there's a form which is vague because it's moving, you know, that kind of thing, a changing form. Although it's hard to see that exactly because the pieces seem extremely solid and fixed. You know, it's not like you're looking at them in motion, although I guess you could make it, but the point is, it's not so much inscrutable. I think what's inscrutable is trying to extrapolate between what you see and the way you explain it. that's inscrutable, you know, to me, because it just seems like for instance, why are some of the pieces single elements cast as a single casting, and others are assemblages? But unless you look very carefully, maybe you can't tell that.
It's suggested by the pieces that are pulled apart. The larger ones are actually assemblages of 3 components that...
Can you put them all together, everything in the room, and make one thing?
They don't lock in like the big ones do. These are designed as standalone pieces. The big one is it locks in.
Is what?
It locks in. The pieces fit. It's tight fit between the 3 pieces that form the bigger parts.
Well, I don't know. I'm just an architect. Well, it seems to me if somebody made a roof like this, I'd be at that building the first day. I mean, I think it's a kind of remarkable, and the idea, but I'm being very literal about it. If this were a cover for a roof, I'd want to know how you put it on the roof, or what shape was the roof, or whether the roof, we don't know whether the roof is the wall, and you're doing this like an igloo. So the building is made out of this. This is how you finish the building?
No, this is literally on the roof.
A conventional,
and the underside of it
this
could
is
be
a
the hollow
conventional run-of-the-mill roof.
No.
It goes on a conventional run-of-the-mill.
Well, it goes on a building that has yet to be designed. Let's put it that way.
Well, let me put it another way. If hypothetically you were asked to say, and I know you wanted to keep it a secret, if you were to use these as roof tiles literally, meaning as they're designed, is that in the offing? In other words, you would literally put something like this on a roof. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What scale are these pieces?
1-to-1.
This is full scale?
Yeah.
So this is a tile right here?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're going to put this on a roof? Okay. So you have to put them together, otherwise it'll leak.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the shape of the roof? I want to see it, because if you go through all of this, you see there's an interesting reason why you put it on the floor. Because if you put it on the roof of SCI-Arc, nobody sees it, except the lawyers on Figaro, and they're too far away on the 50th floor.
Yeah.
They'll see it. But we won't see it, right? So if you make a roof like this, it has to be made to be seen. That's why you did it.
Well, yeah. I mean, the project
can't be to do some green thing.
Well, the project, the hydrofoil
like
project that this derived from, I think I showed it to you one time when we had lunch, that the roof actually pulls down. The idea was that parts of the roof you could access and occupy. That was the original intention to make the tiles. It had a lot to do with the materials research into ceramics, the problems of firing things that had specific forms, which is why we moved, pushed the design of the actual tiles further. Yeah, and the next stage would be to say, okay, well, how would specific roof forms accommodate these tiles?
Do you owe us that?
Huh?
Do you owe us that? So we could see, do you owe us the next step?
I didn't think in this context of an exhibition like this, I didn't think that was, I thought that was too much in a sense, the kind of drawing of the building. I think what we wanted to do was to take these out of context and to say something like a roof tile, a prototype for a roof tile, a prototype for a lighting fixture, something like that could be put into a different context to create several levels of association that remove it from its utility.
Several levels of association, none of which immediately suggest the operational purpose that you claim these were designed for. So by removing them from a literal context, you're suggesting anything but the utilitarian purpose for the pieces. So you're I mean, in a way, you're camouflaging what really is the operational purpose of the pieces by suggesting that they have a very different meaning.
Camouflaging to some extent. I mean,
we don't recognize this as a tile. You don't recognize that as a roof. You don't immediately recognize the green purpose. You certainly don't recognize, even in a technical way, the issues of CNCing or pouring and molding and forming. So I think the experience of it really, for me, is that this is the analog roof, that the wires are the roof, or the wires are a lid, and the wires, in a certain sense, contain this and control it, like the roof in this space contains the room, or controls the room, or limits the room. And the pieces in the room don't extend past the limits of the wires, which suggests a very different kind of spatial idea. You know, so what this really is a space in this space, which is defined by the bumps on the floor and the intermediate lid, which is the wires, and then pieces that interpolate between the two, that belong to the sky and belong to the earth. And you could see it, and this is a kind of amalgamation of pieces, which has a very particular kind of beauty. Like, you know, you got dumped off a ship and swam into some island, and these sort of odd things that are remarkable aesthetically, because they're sort of hard and soft, and the color's odd and all of that, and it's lit with something which is transparent, and it's lit with something that's translucent. That's why I tried to read that the piece at the beginning, because it seems to me the aspiration of the project is really much more poetic and much more aesthetic and much more interpretive and personal. I wanted to say something else, and not for the reason that Wiscombe said, but I wonder if anybody would think that this is a project that could only be done by a woman and couldn't be done by a guy, or not. So this is a dicey territory for me. I don't like this. I think it's a difficult subject, and for a lot of reasons, that people have various political motives, and I don't. But just the aesthetics of it, I don't know. What do you think about that? No?
I don't really think that way.
Yeah.
No, to me it has a lot to do with, I mean, there are a lot of associations. There's Leverance, Sigurd Leverance, his churches with the way those are illuminated. There are certain mosques, the way that mosques are illuminated. I mean, the treatment of the lamps in that sense comes from that. The tiles have a lot to do with...
Before you jumped at it, you're talking about a kind of religious environment which has a certain kind of presence and durability and light and introversion in a way. In a place like that, which at least traditionally has a certain kind of meaning. So this is like a church.
Well, there's that. There's, as I said, the primordial animals, which are really like a kind of fecal matter on the floor. I mean, there's that sort of dark underside of it. There's the Skin of the Earth, a project I worked on years ago with a teacher of mine, Raoul Winschoten.
I don't think you don't get to have 100 options.
There's Lars Englund.
You can't do that.
Just to give you some associations. So I don't know. I don't think the Hans Bellmer, the female body association is the
it has to be that
overriding one.
That was a possibility. The more abstract sense, where you don't have to name what these things are, but you could name the kind of environment that you're talking about. I mean, you don't expect Jay-Z to come rolling in here, do you? Or you do? I mean, you said it was a church. Is he in a choir or something? I mean,
I didn't say it was a church. It could be a mosque.
No, well, that's a church.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a religious building. I mean,
it could be a synagogue.
But as an environment, I mean, it's a sort of sober. I don't mean in a negative way. It's it's a quieting, it's an introverted, it's not like let's burn the building down environment, is it?
No. No.
I think you're listing too many options. You don't get to have all those options. And I think fairly there. Why don't we talk a little bit about the lighting and the form of the lighting and the roof, which is not the roof but is the roof, and because the roof is actually the floor, and the floor is the roof. So the wires play an important role in the thing, and everything belongs to the wires in the sense that it seems to me they identify the space and they tell you what to pay attention to. Please pay attention to this. Please pay attention to this. How do I know? Because you're pointing to me, I should pay attention to this, right? So I mean, this is a gesture from, right? Is that a fair?
Well, the idea was, just to take it's literally a closed
Go ahead.
It's literally a closed electrical circuit, and the idea was to say, okay, if we're constructing a circuit between these 9 sort of clusters of lighting fixtures. How do a group of people, I mean, we had a fantastic group of students enrolled in the workshop, and it was their agenda to both design and install that as a collaborative process, looking at if each person has 50 feet of cable coming from each of those 9 points, how do we negotiate that? And so none of it's, I mean, it's excessive, but it's all got current flowing through it. It's basically the circuitry. And the idea was to form some kind of canopy, as I was saying, the idea of the sargassum, the seaweed that floats on the top of the water and drips down. So we call it the cable sargassum. So that was the way of taking these things which we brought in, the lamps, the tiles, and engaging in, one of the agendas of the gallery, this kind of workshop.
Yeah.
So the collective improv aspect of saying, rather than scripting that, in Grasshopper or something, to actually work with the sort of flex of the cable, the weight of it, to, start to do that as a real-time, one-to-one fabrication.
Well, does it matter? I mean, 2 things. Does it matter? Maybe this is an obvious. If I took that wire and moved it over 3 inches, do you care?
Yeah.
It has to be exactly the way it is.
Yeah.
In the same way, this shape has to be exactly what it is. You can't change the shape. So the position of the wires has something to do with the relationship of the pieces.
Well, now that it's in place, I mean, then that was,
You made it.
Now it's
and
what
you
it
made
is.
it, and now you can't move it. Because there's another possibility. Suppose you could take the wires out of the space. Suppose we removed the horizontal wires, and what you had are the objects on the floor and the pieces hanging down, let's say, from the conventional lid. How about that?
I mean, at a certain point, we looked at that and thought about how to then, really raising the whole thing up to the top of the ceiling. But in this space, creating a certain kind of intimacy. I mean, the lights need to be near the tiles.
But let me just, in a conceptual way, that people would look at and say, okay, this is a strategy. Whereas these pieces, the lighting pieces, and whatever this is on the floor, seems to have a certain kind of persona and originality. The exposing of wires and cables, whether it's done for pragmatic reasons or for whatever reasons it's done, belongs to a genre of architecture which has been around for a long time. Pipes and ducts and wires, and that's an acceptable, even a desirable, I'm not saying it is, I actually don't think it is, but in the lexicon of what architecture is, you find that a lot. and if somebody makes a building with pipes and ducts and so on and so on, and I think this is still true in many ways, it is a reflection of a technical process or a technical understanding that gives it a kind of credence. Whereas if you took that away, and hypothetically, however you lit this stuff, but if you took that away, then it would belong exclusively to what you made, which is really yours, personally. I'm not saying you can't do this. I'm just saying it seemed to me when I looked at it that this and this had a meaning I didn't recognize, and this, which pulled it all together, had a meaning that everybody recognized. And mostly would agree to, rightly or wrong. You know what I mean? Or no?
Well, it also resonates with the drawing, the kind of way that the drawing is done in terms of the differential thickness of the lines, that eschewing the convention of having the outline of the object be the heaviest line and actually using line weight to delineate what's been subtracted from another form. And so that there's a certain idea of creating a resonance between that drawing on the wall and that drawing in space. So, you know, the act of drawing.
You mean that, it's not that to that, or that to that, it's that to that, or it's that to that? In other words, what is that drawing of? What is that?
Well, of the tile, of the lamp. It's the same geometry. These are all using.
But it's not that.
Primitive.
It's not the why. I mean, the sense of the drawing may be that, but in a literal sense, the drawing is either that or it's that.
Tile and lamp geometry.
But it doesn't give you the wires.
No.
So there's something.
But it resonates with the wires. Right. Again, the association.
Well, we started out by saying the drawing basically accounts for all the pieces.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It doesn't account for the wires.
Not directly, no.
Not in a literal sense. But in a literal sense, the drawing accounts for the lights and the pieces on the floor. In other words, if you have that drawing, you can make that and that and that.
Yep.
But you can't make that.
No.
So where'd that come from?
That came from a group of people who are hopefully
Thomas
here
Edison.
in the room. No, that came from really the diagram of saying, okay, what if you've, again, like you start with a certain number of points and say, let's connect those points. Each one has a certain length of cable, 50 feet. How do we tie that together, as it were?
I have a feeling, I really think the pieces are extremely beautiful, very original, very seductive. And I have a feeling that what we're talking and everything we're saying is bouncing off. Like somehow we didn't really touch what's in front of us. And maybe this is a credit to the artist or to the architect. But anyway, I'm very appreciative of the sensibility and the originality. I guess I'm not particularly a fan of the technical argument, even though that argument is of interest to everyone who makes things. And I have to say, in a very different form, I would very much look forward. Somebody should build this. A building with a roof like this has never been seen. It should be built, whatever its green properties at this end. I don't know. Okay.
Can I just say one thing before we wrap up? Because I really want to thank a few people, you, Eric, and SCI-Arc, just for giving us the opportunity to do something like this. It's been amazing, a definite learning experience and a lot of fun. And we're very thankful on behalf of Ulrika Carlson, my partner from Servo Stockholm, and William Moline from Servo Los Angeles. And I also really want to thank the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts and the Pasadena Art Alliance for their generous support. I know that they're often supporting the public programs here. Couldn't have done it without them. And the SRE and VR and Formus from our Swedish sponsors. And special thanks again to the group of SCI-Arc students who participated in the workshop and to Ryan Martinez, who made a fantastic video that's playing out there that'll soon be up online. So yeah, I think that is about it. Our fabricators, Josh Gelfin and Nick Petronzio as well. Hope I haven't forgotten anyone, but just want to make sure to thank everyone.
Well, thank you again for your. Thanks for your effort. I think it's uniquely a voice. I mean, I think you have a voice, which, although you explain what you do in the context of what a lot of people do, I think actually a lot of people don't do this. So even though there are general predilections, I think this is extremely personal and appealing for that reason. I went to my kid's school the other day, and the teacher had trying to get the kids to read to no avail, and it had a sign up on his desk, a quote from Kafka, and it said, a book should be an ice axe to cut the sea frozen inside us. So this is what they're giving to 10-year-olds. Therefore, you can understand why they don't read. But there is something extremely poignant about that kind of demands that a writer would make on his work, or an architect would. And I think this has some of those extremely poignant ice axe qualities. Very much appreciated, and thanks to your team, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for coming.